There is a saying that every veteran knows. War is months and months of boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. You hear it so often, it almost sounds like a cliché. Something a retired general might mutter in a documentary interview before the camera cuts away to battlefield footage. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, in some forgotten corner of a war zone, a 19-year-old kid with a rifle realizes exactly what that phrase means. Because the terror, as awful as it is, at least gives you something to do. Your training kicks in, adrenaline floods your system, your mind sharpens to a single point of focus. The boredom is the part that nobody warns you about. And the things soldiers did to fight it across centuries of warfare, some of them were brilliant, some were insane, and a few of them actually changed the world. Rome, around 100 AD. A Roman legionnaire stationed along the empire's northern frontier on the banks of the Rhine wakes up to the same day he lived yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. His unit has not seen combat in months. The Germanic tribes on the other side of the river are quiet. The fortifications are built. The roads are paved. The walls are solid. And yet, he cannot leave. He signed up for 25 years of service, and the Roman army does not care that he is bored. His day starts before sunrise with inspection and drill. He marches in formation, practices sword strikes on wooden posts, and runs through tactical maneuvers that he has already memorized in his sleep. By midday, the actual military work is done. The rest of the day stretches out in front of him like an empty road with no destination. So what does a Roman soldier do with all that time? He gambles. Roman soldiers were obsessed with dice games, and they bet on everything they could think of. Dice, knucklebones, board games scratched right into stone floors. Archaeologists have found gambling boards carved into the steps of buildings at military outposts from Hadrian's Wall in Britain all the way to the deserts of Syria. Soldiers bet their daily wages, their rations, sometimes even their equipment. Officers tried to crack down on it constantly. The gambling continued anyway, because it always does. When they were not rolling dice, they hunted in the forests near their posts. They wrestled and competed in physical contests to establish dominance among their peers. Wrestling well, running fast, carrying heavy loads, swimming strongly. These things earned a soldier respect that had nothing to do with rank. They visited the bathhouses that the army built at nearly every permanent garrison, because Rome understood something instinctively that later militaries would take centuries to figure out. Idle soldiers become dangerous soldiers. Give them baths, give them taverns, give them something to burn their energy on, or they will find something on their own, and you will not like what they choose. Nearby civilian settlements grew around permanent military bases, like small towns sprouting in the shadow of a fortress. Soldiers spent their coins on food, wine, small luxuries, and companionship. They scratched graffiti into barrack walls, sometimes complaints, sometimes jokes, sometimes just their names, as if to say, I was here and I existed. They observed religious rituals and prayed to gods they hoped were listening. A legionnaire far from his birthplace might spend more time with his tentmates than with his own family back in Rome or Gaul, and those bonds, forged through shared danger and shared boredom in equal measure, became the quiet backbone of Roman military power. The empire was built on legendary battles and brilliant generals, sure, but it was held together by millions of ordinary days when soldiers had nothing to do and somehow managed not to fall apart. That rhythm of long stretches of monotony, broken only by occasional bursts of violence, defined Roman military life for centuries. And it would define every military that came after. Fast forward roughly 1700 years to the American Civil War, and the pattern repeats itself with an almost eerie precision. Union and Confederate soldiers spent the vast majority of their enlistment doing absolutely nothing related to combat. A New Jersey veteran named Camille Baquette described it plainly. Drill, dress parade, inspection, picket and guard duty, policing, and building roads were the usual occupations. And then, somehow, you had to fill the rest of the day. Camp life was the real war for most of these men. The decision to fill that emptiness would shape American culture in ways nobody at the time could have predicted. Gambling was everywhere. Card games, dice games, soldiers wagering their monthly pay on anything with an outcome. Poker, 21, Keno, euchre. They bet on foot races, boxing matches, wrestling bouts, and yes, cockfights. Gambling prevailed in every conceivable form, from horse races to louse races, and that is not a typo. Soldiers actually raced lice. They would pick lice off their uniforms, place them on a plate, and bet on which one would crawl to the edge first. If you are wondering what kind of boredom drives a person to organize insect racing, the answer is the kind that comes from sitting in a field in Virginia for 4 months with nothing to read and nowhere to go. One account from an Alabama regiment in August of 1861 describes a gambling mania that swept through camp so intensely that officers could barely maintain discipline. And here is a detail that reveals something about how these young men thought about their own mortality. Many soldiers who gambled obsessively would throw their playing cards away on the march before heading into battle. Broken promises littered the roads to hundreds of battlefields in the form of scattered cards dropped along the way. They did not want their families to find playing cards among their returned belongings if they were killed. They feared disappointing their mothers more than they feared the bullets. Others went the opposite direction entirely, posing for photographs proudly holding cards, smoking cigars, and drinking, mocking the morality that tried to keep them in line. When they were not gambling, they played sports. And this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the Civil War is one of the main reasons baseball became America's national pastime. The game existed before the war, but it was mostly a New York thing, played under specific New York rules that nobody elsewhere really knew. Camp life changed all of that. Soldiers from New York taught the game to soldiers from Ohio, Georgia, Texas, everywhere. Historian Belle Irvin Wiley called baseball the most popular competitive sport in the camps of both armies. They played in open fields between drill sessions. They played in prisoner of war camps where Union and Confederate soldiers shared a diamond. And when they went home after the war ended, they brought the game with them to every corner of the country. Baseball went from a regional curiosity to a national phenomenon, largely because a generation of bored soldiers needed something to do between battles. The creativity did not stop at the diamond. One unit used cannonballs to bowl at rough wooden pins they had carved themselves. Wrestling and boxing matches drew crowds of hundreds. Foot races, horse races, leapfrog, pole climbing contests. In winter, entire brigades organized snowball fights that were basically military operations in miniature. Officers joined in, battle plans were drawn up, flanking maneuvers were executed with the same seriousness as an actual assault. Men came away with black eyes, bruises, and occasionally broken limbs. It was war without the dying, and the troops absolutely loved it. Music filled the camps at night. Confederate soldiers were especially known for their singing, gathering in small groups for what they called musical sprees or jubilees. They played fiddles and banjos, some of them homemade instruments built from drum heads nailed over halved whiskey kegs with rough pine necks and screw-tightened strings. A good fiddler could lift the mood of an entire regiment, and soldiers did not just sit and listen. They got up and danced. Two-step jigs in the firelight, performed by men who had been digging latrines and cleaning rifles all day. Sentimental ballads were the favorites, not patriotic anthems. Songs about sweethearts and home, and the aching desire to be anywhere else. Lorena, Annie Laurie, The Yellow Rose of Texas. Soldiers staged amateur theatrical productions, with men performing all the roles, including the female parts. They told elaborate jokes around the campfire, which served as the military equivalent of the family hearth or the local tavern. They pulled ruthless pranks on new recruits. During one rainstorm, a fresh soldier reportedly asked whether umbrellas were issued. The veterans never let him forget it. Whittling became an art form in itself, with men carving pipes, figurines, chess pieces, and small gifts to send home. Chaplains held services that drew crowds, and regimental brass bands gave concerts that could be heard for miles. And both sides, Union and Confederate, sang the same tunes without appreciating the full weight of the irony. Home Sweet Home echoed across opposing camps on quiet winter nights, carried by voices that belonged to men who would try to kill each other when the spring campaign began. That was life between battles on open ground, though. When the trenches of World War I swallowed an entire generation of young European men, boredom became something darker and far more claustrophobic. A British soldier named Clifford Lane of the Hertfordshire Regiment later put it in terms that still hit hard over a century later. He said nobody could imagine being stuck in a trench, 6 feet high, in the middle of winter, day after day, with nothing to do at all. During quiet periods on the Western Front, the routine was numbingly simple. Stand to arms at dawn in case of an attack, inspect rifles, clean your kit, eat whatever food made it through the supply lines, if it made it at all. Then sit in the mud and wait. And try not to think about the sniper who might catch you if you raised your head above the parapet. Soldiers adapted, because soldiers always adapt. Playing cards became a universal language across every army in the war. Brag, pontoon, nap, poker. Games that could be played in a cramped dugout by candlelight with hands that had not been properly clean in weeks. When they could not play cards, they boxed. Organized matches drew crowds in rear areas, with soldiers from different regiments competing against each other as if unit pride depended on it, which, in a way, it did. Entire social hierarchies and small economies ran on card games and sporting competitions in those trenches, but the creative responses to boredom are the ones that still catch people off guard. Soldiers started making art from the refuse of industrialized killing. They took spent brass shell casings, shrapnel fragments, pieces of copper driving bands, and scraps of battlefield debris, and they shaped them into decorative objects with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Vases etched with intricate floral patterns. Picture frames for photographs of wives and children back home. Letter openers, cigarette cases, lighters, model airplanes, even vessels for communion wafers. This became known as trench art, and it was so widespread that museums today hold thousands of examples. Men took the literal waste of mechanized warfare and turned it into something beautiful. There is something about that impulse that goes beyond killing time. It was a way of insisting, quietly and stubbornly, that they were still human beings with steady hands and creative minds, not just bodies waiting in a hole. Soldiers also wrote, not just letters home, which were constant and desperately important, but entire newspapers, unofficial publications created by troops on the Western Front, written by soldiers, produced on whatever printing equipment they could beg, borrow, or steal, and read by other soldiers in the trenches. The British had several. The French had theirs. The Germans had theirs. Australia's soldiers published a paper called Aussie, and the Americans, despite arriving late to the war, launched the Stars and Stripes. These trench newspapers were part dark comedy, part biting commentary, part communal therapy. They poked fun at incompetent officers, complained viciously about the food, published cartoons about life in the mud, and gave men a creative outlet that doubled as a psychological survival tool. Writing and reading these rough little publications helped soldiers maintain a sense of identity when everything around them was designed to strip it away. And this is the part of the story that still gives people chills. December of 1914. The war was barely 5 months old, and the Western Front had already become a frozen, blood-soaked stalemate. Late on Christmas Eve, British soldiers in their trenches heard something drifting across the shell-cratered wasteland of no man's land. German soldiers were singing, Stille Nacht, Silent Night. Small Christmas trees with lit candles appeared along the German trench line. Messages were shouted back and forth between the opposing positions. And on Christmas morning, something happened that generals on both sides would have called mutiny if they had been there to witness it. Soldiers climbed out of their trenches. They walked into no man's land. They shook hands with the men who had been trying to kill them 24 hours earlier. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, and souvenirs. They took photographs standing shoulder to shoulder. They buried the dead who had been lying between the lines. And according to multiple eyewitness accounts from both sides, they played football. Lieutenant Johannes Niemann of the 133rd Saxon Infantry Regiment wrote that a Tommy came with a football and started kicking it around, and then a proper match began. They marked the goals with their caps. The Germans reportedly won 3-2. Whether it was a real match or just a wild kickabout on frozen, uneven ground depends on which account you believe. But it happened. Boredom and homesickness and the sheer human need for connection did what diplomacy never could. It turned enemies into people, if only for one afternoon. After Boxing Day, the meetings faded out. The shelling resumed. High command on both sides made absolutely certain that nothing like it would ever be allowed to happen again. If you are finding this useful, hit subscribe. New videos like this drop every week. By the early 1940s, the world was at war again, and this time, military leadership had finally learned what Roman generals understood 2,000 years before them. If you do not give soldiers something to do with their downtime, they will find their own entertainment, and the results will not always be good for discipline, health, or unit readiness. World War II saw the first truly organized, industrial-scale effort to keep millions of troops occupied and sane. The United Service Organizations, the USO, was founded in 1941 at the direct request of President Franklin Roosevelt. It brought together 6 civilian organizations, including the YMCA, the Salvation Army, and the National Jewish Welfare Board, to create a unified morale and recreation system for American troops. The scale was staggering. By 1944, there were over 3,000 USO clubs operating worldwide, and an average of 700 shows were performed every single day. Between 1941 and 1947, over 420,000 live performances reached more than 130 million service members. The biggest names in entertainment volunteered to perform: Bing Crosby, Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Marlene Dietrich. Hollywood went to war, and it went willingly. Bob Hope became the single most recognizable figure of this effort. He performed his first major overseas USO tour in the combat zones of North Africa and Italy in 1943, and he almost did not come home from it. During a stop in Palermo, German bombers hit the docks and buildings around his hotel. He later said that returning to Hollywood afterward felt like a letdown, because Hollywood was tinsel and happy endings, and where they had been was mud and reality. The near-death experience did not stop him. He took another tour to the Pacific Theater the following year, and he kept going for decades after that. His comedy worked because he targeted the things every soldier despised: the boredom, the terrible food, the officers. He gave exhausted young men permission to laugh at the absurdity of their situation. And for a few minutes at a time, the war disappeared. 37 USO camp show members were killed during World War II. One touring group of 4 women traveled by dog sled to a remote outpost in Alaska to perform for just 4 soldiers stationed there, and then cooked them a meal. That group went on to do 830 shows total. Entertainment in a combat zone was not safe work, but people kept doing it because the alternative, millions of isolated soldiers left alone with nothing but their own fear and silence, was considered worse. Beyond live shows, the military built an entire recreation infrastructure from scratch. The Special Services Division ran camp theaters, showing first-run Hollywood films, sometimes outdoors on makeshift screens, while soldiers sat on helmets and ammunition crates under the stars. Armed Forces Radio broadcast popular music, comedy programs, and war news to bases around the globe, giving soldiers a shared soundtrack that connected men on islands in the Pacific to men in foxholes across France. Yank magazine, produced entirely by enlisted journalists and featuring soldier-written articles, cartoons, and the famous pin-up photographs, hit a worldwide circulation of 2.5 million copies per issue. The government even declared beer essential to morale and arranged dedicated shipments overseas, reasoning that a soldier with a cold beer in his hand was a soldier less likely to cause problems. And when all the official entertainment dried up, soldiers returned to the same default activities their Civil War ancestors relied on. Card games that lasted for days. Pick-up baseball leagues at bases from England to Okinawa. Trench art, which continued into the Second World War with over 150 pieces now displayed at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans alone. Vietnam changed the equation in ways nobody anticipated. Everything about it was different. The average American combat soldier in Vietnam was 19 years old, pulled from a society that was ripping itself apart over civil rights, generational conflict, and the very war he was fighting. The boredom between firefights and patrols was the same emptiness that soldiers had known since Rome. But the ways these particular soldiers chose to fill it reflected a generation in the middle of a cultural earthquake. Music became more than entertainment. It became emotional survival gear. Armed Forces Vietnam Network, known as AFVN, broadcast radio programming to troops throughout the country. But the music soldiers actually listened to, the songs they carried on personal cassette players and shared in hooches and bunkers, was not always what the official network played. This was the late 60s and early 70s. The counterculture was rewriting the rules of American life back home, and it reached into the jungles of Southeast Asia through every mail call and every new rotation of draftees. Rock, soul, psychedelic music, protest songs. The Animals We Gotta Get Out of This Place became an unofficial anthem because the words said exactly what every soldier felt in his bones. They wanted to go home. The music gave them a way to express that without breaking regulations. Rest and relaxation leave, universally called R&R, sent soldiers to destinations outside Vietnam for short breaks: Bangkok, Tokyo, Sydney, Hong Kong, Honolulu. Each place offered its own version of normalcy. For a few days, a 20-year-old infantryman could sleep in a real bed, eat food that was not from a can, and walk down a street without scanning rooftops for threats. Then he went back. The psychological whiplash of going from a Bangkok hotel room to a foxhole in the Central Highlands within 72 hours was something that military psychologists were only beginning to understand. Red Cross workers, known as donut dollies, a nickname left over from World War II, visited soldiers in the field and at base camps. They played games with the troops and provided what the program called straight American girl talk. Their job was to act as if nothing was wrong, to bring a slice of normalcy into a place that had none. For many soldiers, those brief interactions were the closest thing to home they experienced during their entire tour. The counterculture's influence created friction that older wars simply never produced. Soldiers decorated helmets and flak jackets with peace symbols, song lyrics, and irreverent graffiti. They pushed boundaries with personal appearance whenever officers looked the other way. They questioned the mission itself in conversations that would have been unthinkable in World War II. The boredom of Vietnam was tangled up with disillusionment in a way that previous generations of soldiers had never experienced. The empty hours felt heavier, more complicated, harder to fill with a card game or a baseball diamond, because the question hanging over everything was not just when will this end, but why are we here in the first place? In the wars that followed, the technology shifted dramatically, but the core reality stayed exactly the same. A soldier on a forward operating base in Iraq in 2005, or in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, in 2010 had tools for killing time that would have seemed like science fiction to a GI in 1944. Video game consoles wired up in shipping containers converted into barracks, laptops with satellite internet, cell phones for calling home, social media for scrolling through pictures of a life that felt impossibly far away. Larger bases had morale, welfare, and recreation facilities with gyms, movie screens, and chain restaurant franchises that created surreal little pockets of suburban America inside a war zone. And still, talk to any veteran of those deployments, and the phrase comes out within the first 5 minutes. Hurry up and wait. Rush to gear up. Rush to the staging area. Rush to the convoy briefing. And then sit. For hours. Sometimes the mission gets delayed. Sometimes it gets scrubbed entirely. A 2010 study of more than 1,500 Marines deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan found that stressors like boredom, monotony, and lack of privacy were linked to roughly double the odds of mental health difficulties after deployment. Boredom was not just uncomfortable. It was clinically measurable as a source of real psychological harm. Modern soldiers still played cards, the same games their great-great-grandfathers dealt in Civil War camps. They still lifted weights until their bodies ached, building muscle that served no tactical purpose but gave them something to control when everything else was out of their hands. They played video games for hours, entire platoons competing in first-person shooters on screens propped up in plywood rooms, which carries its own strange irony when you think about it. They watched bootleg movies on laptops. They read paperbacks until the covers fell off. They called and emailed home so often that the separation from family became its own unique form of torment, because unlike soldiers in every previous war, they could hear their children's voices and see their spouses' faces on a screen, only to hang up and go back to a world those loved ones could not begin to understand. They found pitch-black humor in the absurdity of their situation, recording shaky videos on handheld cameras and cheap phones that they eventually uploaded to YouTube and social media, turning their boredom into content for an audience back home. The medium was brand new. The impulse was ancient. A Roman legionnaire carving a dice game into a stone step on the Rhine frontier and a Marine in Anbar province filming a comedy sketch on a flip phone are separated by 2,000 years of history, but connected by exactly the same need. The need to prove to themselves that they are still people in a place designed to reduce them to functions. What soldiers did during the endless hours of boredom was never really about entertainment. It was about staying human. Every card game played in the mud of the Somme, every baseball diamond scratched into a Virginia field, every fiddle song drifting across a campfire, every shell casing hammered into a flower vase, every football kicked across frozen ground between men who were supposed to be enemies. All of it was a small, stubborn act of defiance against the thing that war does to people when the shooting stops and the silence moves in. Boredom strips away purpose. It leaves you alone with fear, doubt, grief, and the slow creeping awareness that you might never see your family again. The soldiers who truly survived, not just physically but as whole human beings, were the ones who found something to put inside that emptiness. A deck of cards, a song from home, a letter that took 3 weeks to arrive but kept a marriage breathing, a joke so dark that only the person sitting next to you in the dirt would laugh, but that one laugh was enough to get you through another day. Generals plan the battles. Politicians sign the declarations. Historians write about the charges and the sieges and the treaties. But the real, unwritten history of every war ever fought lives in the margins. In the long, quiet, unglamorous hours when nothing was happening and ordinary people in uniform had to decide, again and again, what kind of human being they were going to remain while they waited for the next terrible thing to arrive. That is the war that never makes the textbooks, and it is the one that every soldier in every era has had to fight alone. If this video showed you a side of war you had not considered before, drop a like and leave a comment telling us which era surprised you the most, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one.